Zodiac, why is fan art feature at the beginning of this video? Don't you usually do it at the end of the videos? You're correct, I do usually do it at the end of the videos, but I felt like shaking things up today because I didn't really have any footage on hand to do this segment of the video, so fan art. Please go check out everyone who did wonderful fan art for me because I love them all so much and I'm so grateful they make me fan art. But yes, so I did want to do a quick disclaimer real quick for two different things. First of all, I do ramble. Like, this is outlined, but it's not scripted down to the final word. So if you don't really like a little bit of rambling in your videos, that's totally cool, but you've been warned if you continue to watch this video. Secondly, I need to state off the bat here that do not take any of these as personal attacks. This video is not aimed at anyone particular. These are all random art style trends that I personally don't like for whatever reason, and I've seen multiple different people do. So there's not one person I'm thinking of whenever I have examples for these. They're just general things that I personally am not a huge fan of. And it's also totally okay if you do this sort of stuff or if you like this kind of stuff. It's all subjective, whatever. I just want to make a video shouting my opinion, I guess, as people on YouTube do. And if you have something that you like or don't like when it comes to art styles, feel free to put it in the comments. I'd be curious to hear it and all that good stuff. So yeah, with that out of the way, just know this isn't a personal attack on anybody. It's just me shouting my opinion from across the water. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's get into my art pet peeves. Alright, so for my first pet peeve is something I wrote down as a spacey liner. This is basically, it's interesting because this isn't a very common trend, but I've seen it with multiple different artists, so that's why I included it in here. It's not just one person, I've seen multiple people do it. But it's basically where an artist will leave these intentional gaps in the line art in seemingly random places, and some places it kind of makes more sense. Like a good example is when you have like the eye and the corner of the eye will have a separation between the quote unquote eyelashes and the actual tear duct and that kind of thing, and that makes a little bit more sense to me. But then you'll have random gaps in like the middle of the cheek or on the middle of the neck or on the shoulder or whatever, in kind of random places. And I'd be interested to know how this sort of art trend kind of caught on, like who started it, who like grabbed onto it, whatever, because it is very unique, in a sense in terms of line art. But it's something that I personally don't find very appealing. It looks very jittery, and it kind of makes me think of like, when some beginner artists start digital art and they will go into their art program and they'll draw and they won't really pay attention, so they'll have these like random gaps or overlapping lines in their artwork. It reminds me of that, but you'll see this artwork and you can tell very clearly it's an intentional choice. It's not a mistake. It's a choice. And for me, for some reason, it kind of reminds me of the artwork where it's not supposed to be intentional. And it also almost makes me think like, it almost looks like a glitch to me. Like, I don't mean to be rude, but like it makes me think of like there was a glitch on the canvas or something. So random gaps in your line art formed. Like, like a random white line went through your drawing and erased that part of your line art. And it just looks a little bit distracting, especially on certain kinds of artwork. It just feels a little bit distracting, especially whenever the brush, because for most of the time when I see this, the brush settings will be the same thickness and pressure throughout. So it makes it even more noticeable and it makes it even more kind of odd to me. I don't know why. And in a weird way, I guess part of me is just like, it is creating a bit more work for yourself when it comes to coloring, but that's okay. If people want to do that, that's fine. But to me, I wonder why put in the extra effort for coloring, but it is what it is. But it just feels a little bit odd to me, and it looks a little bit distracting, and I do feel a little bit disappointed sometimes whenever I see a thumbnail for a picture. I'm like, ooh, that looks really pretty, and then I click to enlarge it, and it's kind of like I'm suddenly distracted by noticing right away that there's these like random gaps in the line art of the face, especially when the line art is like a prominent feature of the drawing. I think when the line art is like more desaturated, more faded into the picture, I think it's less, you know, it's less jarring and it blends in a little bit better. But when the line art's supposed to be a stronger element, it becomes a little bit more distracting, and you know, you almost spend too much time thinking about the line art than you do the actual picture. But I don't know, that's just me. Be interested to know where this sort of trend came from and who started it and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. My next pet peeve is eyes and faces when they look like they're sitting on top of the hair. Now, I should clarify. I'm not talking about whenever a thing a lot of artists do where they still keep the line art even like showing for eyebrows and eyes under the hair. Like that's something I do, obviously. So, you know, but I don't mind that. I used to actually hate that. I used to think that like, oh, why would you do that? That's so unrealistic, you know. But now after a while, I've understood why people cheat a little bit like that, and that's because it's to show expressions better, so you don't lose it with the hair and that kind of thing. And I mean, me having a certain character where her hair covers her eyes completely, I have to make sure people can see her eyebrows through her hair just for the sake of being able to show expression. You know, so I understand that part now, but what I'm talking about is when the eyes and sometimes eyebrows are colored even though they're supposed to be under the hair. And this can extend to being able to see. I especially have this gripe whenever like the hair is supposed to be covering like 50% of the eye, which this actually can go for line art. You know, sometimes I feel like whenever you have a character who their eye is pretty much entirely covered by their hair, I think you should just not draw it, you know. Eyebrows maybe, but eyes I feel like no. But like I don't, line art to me is one thing, but whenever you can see the full coloring for the eye over the hair, it reads as if the eyes are sitting on top of the hair, you know? Like, because you shouldn't be able to see the color. You might be able to see bits of your eye through your hair, but you wouldn't see the full color, you know? And sometimes you'll even have people who will not even do the line art going through the hair. Like I did that for this picture because I wanted to accentuate like where the hair was, so you can see what I mean when I say coloring on top of it. But sometimes you'll have people where they will just erase the line art completely from the hair. So it adds this weird effect where it almost looks like either the hair has been cut so precisely to where there's a perfect window to see the entirety of the character's eyes, or that the eyes are actually just sitting on top of the hair, and it looks weird and it looks hard to understand, you know? It's like, it kind of is distracting and it makes it a little bit, it's just awkward to look at, you know, in my personal opinion. This next one can sometimes be attributed to being a bit more of a beginner's mistake rather than an intentional stylistic choice. But it's whenever like horns and sometimes ears are drawn where it looks like they are sitting on top of the hair rather than being under the hair and attached to the head. I didn't really do a good example for ears, but you'll see this a lot with like animal ears when people have like human characters with hair and animal ears. Like you'll see it a lot with anime sometimes, and you'll see it a lot with horns. And again, sometimes this is a bit more of a beginner's mistake rather than being a intentional stylistic choice, but I think sometimes it could be, so you know. But you know, it just, the way it's drawn is that like, you know, there's no indication that the hair is going over the ears or over the horns, or that the horns are poking out through the hair or something like that. And so instead it looks as if the horns are literally sitting on top of the hair or even growing out of the hair, you know? And sometimes I just get this because you know, like from like doing art like for other people, like as a commission artist or whatever, it can be a little bit difficult because, you know, you'll see this character and you sit there and you can't tell if it's supposed to be an actual horn or if it's supposed to be like part of the hair or if it's supposed to be like a headband or something like that, you know. So in the case though that this is more of a, like if you're watching this and you notice you do this and it's not an intentional like choice, then my advice is, if you want to change it, is to just make sure you draw the horns on the head first and then draw the hair. Because like having horns and stuff, especially depending on the size, will actually change the shape of your hairstyle and stuff like that, you know? Because like if you got, for example, two giant horns growing out of your forehead, your bangs are not just going to sit straight down. They're going to have to go around those horns and stuff like that. So, you know, this one's a little bit, can more commonly be a mistake than a stylistic choice. But either way, it is something that is a personal pet peeve of mine because it just looks like you just took some Elmer's glue, stuck it to the horn, and just stuck it onto the hair. Like, you know, it just, I don't want to say it reads like a bad cosplay, but sometimes it can. Sorry. All right. Anyway, next one. So the next one is like very jarring, brightly colored line art on a piece where it just really doesn't work. And sometimes I will see it where it will like it's a color that works for the rest of the picture, but not like a specific part of the picture. Typically colors like gray or with whatever, or like brown or something like that. And this one, obviously my version is a little bit more exaggerated, but I will say this is something that definitely can work with certain people, especially people who have like where their colors and their shading is also very bright and saturated, you know? But sometimes I will see people do this, especially for sketches, and obviously sketches are a bit different because that might not be the finished piece, but when I do see it for sketches, it's a little bit unappealing to me. But it's basically where you'll have a piece that typically is colored rather with pretty relatively normal colors, but the line art color will be very unfitting for most, if not a portion of the drawing, and it will look really distracting, and it kind of can be hard to look at sometimes. The best example I can give is whenever people use a very saturated, like dark blue on a picture that doesn't have a lot of colors that look good against that dark blue, you know? And again, this can work if you pick the right color and if the rest of your piece has colors that best reflect that kind of line art color, you know? But sometimes, like, again, usually where this fails typically is whenever you have very desaturated colors with very, very bright saturated line art, especially when that line art is dark, and also when it's light. Typically, light line art can be extremely distracting in most places, depending on what you're doing and what you're trying to accomplish. So the next one is really distracting blush. This is something that I've seen, like, not only in anime, but I've seen it a lot and just generally all over the board. It's a very common thing I see. But it's whenever, like, you draw a character that's blushing, sometimes not even just blushing, but, like, you just generally draw, like, the natural blush we all kind of have when we're just standing there without any makeup on, you know, and that kind of thing. But you draw that kind of thing, but you have it be very, 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 very red, very, very bright, and have very definitive starts and ends to where it looks almost like your character has a fever, you know? Like, that's just in my opinion. That's sometimes what it reads like. It kind of reads like your character's sick rather than blushing. And like sometimes I have seen people where they can kind of make this work, but usually it works better whenever the color is a bit more of a darker skin tone type of color rather than red or like a very stark pink, you know? Which you'll often see very often, and it just can be a little bit distracting. I don't know. It's something that I've always personally had like a little bit of a pet peeve for, even when I was younger. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, there are places where this kind of thing can work, but usually that's with like really cartoony styles that do like maybe a circle blush kind of thing. But I think in those cases, it's usually, you know, it ends up looking a bit more like, I don't know how to describe it. It looks more designated, while with this, it looks a bit messier, and it looks like it's supposed to be blending into the face, even though it's not. And I mean, this one's a little bit exaggerated. I don't see many people use this bright a red. I see some people do, but not everybody. But you just know what I mean. It's very stark, very noticeable, and very, very saturated. And it's just something that I personally find a little distracting because it doesn't read to me like a character blushing, it reads like a character having a fever, you know? And I think the easiest way is, like, I would say, as I prefer it, is having it be one closer, much closer to the skin tone, a lot more faded out, and a lot more blended into the face. While yes, like our cheeks, our noses, and our ears are the places where that'll get the most red, that transitions to our whole face. If you've ever seen someone blush in embarrassment, it's not just their cheeks that flush; it is their whole face. Their cheeks may be the reddest area, but like, trust me, as somebody who their nose gets really red really easily, it'll be your whole face, you know? So, yeah. This next one is something I see done in anime all the time, and it drives me insane. This one, I have it, like, just as a joke for that one, for this example, I made it, the character look like 10 times more anime than I usually draw, just to accentuate the fact that I most commonly see this in anime. I'll see it in other places, but I mostly see it in anime. But it is where there are noses where the character is facing fully front, like their eyes and their ears and their face shape all imply that the character is facing 100% directly into the camera, but their nose is still angled as if their head is at a bit of an angle. And it drives me absolutely crazy. This has since I was like even a kid. I'd see this kind of thing and I'd be like, why is their nose pointed in a different direction? Is it broken? It looks very, very distracting to me. It always has. It always makes it look as if the nose is broken or like the face is slightly angled, but the eyes and ears are not reflecting it. And it makes the whole face look wonky. Even if everything, like, even if you put your finger up and taking the nose away made it look fine, it's like just that nose makes the whole face look wonky, especially like in my example here, because the nose is facing a different direction than the neck, it even makes it look a little bit weirder. You know, and again, maybe it's just me, but I've always found these like awkwardly angled noses to be really distracting and just bug me so much, because I like everything else will look beautiful and then you'll just see that nose and you're like, oh my god, that nose. This next one is whenever there is, on a picture or image, there is skin shading, but everything else in the image is not shaded. Sometimes I don't really mind this whenever it's something that's kind of a work in progress picture. I think it's very cool to see that progression. And I do think there are instances where this can work artistically, depending on the vibe the piece is going for and things like that. But are particularly in cases where a character is wearing like skin tight clothing or something like that. It looks a bit odd to have nothing but the skin shaded, even more so whenever it's like, you know, their face is fully detailed, but their hair's not, and then their clothes aren't, but then you'll see like their forearm is fully shaded, and it seems almost like someone drew over a picture, you know, sometimes that's just how it feels like. Now, I will say, for my example here, I'm really happy with how it came out, with the actual shading to get my idea through, and in a weird way, I do kind of like this little picture, but at the same time, I would personally want to go back and finish this kind of thing and add shading, the equal amount of shading and stuff to the hair and clothing. It just feels a little odd, and it can make it confusing where the light source is and what the mood of the piece is supposed to be. And again, it just, to me, almost sometimes looks like someone just sort of drew hair on top of an already shaded piece. And you know, our hair and clothes and all that stuff, well, because the skin is shaded while the hair and clothes are not. Normally I can see this work better if, for example, the hair or clothes are supposed to be very dark black or something like that, you know. Sometimes maybe even a stark white if that's the kind of contrast you're going for. And again, there are instances, I think, where this sort of stylistic thing can work in moderation. I just think sometimes it's odd when I see full pieces where certain elements of the picture, most of the time the skin, is fully rendered out and very detailed, and then other elements are not. This especially gets on my nerves whenever it's like a reference sheet, because I've seen a few people do this for specifically reference sheets, and it can irritate me because I can't tell already. I don't really like it whenever reference sheets have heavy shading, because it makes it really hard to color pick and understand what's color and what's shadow, you know, that kind of thing. But I see this sometimes where on a reference sheet where the skin will be shaded but nothing else will. And it's just a personal thing for me. I just don't personally like it for finished artwork. I think it looks unfinished, you know? This is one that definitely can work. I see this a lot with anime, and that's usually where instances where it kind of does bug me a bit more. But this is definitely one that can work if the rest of a person's style kind of accommodates for it. Like this next one is things that are colored and shaded really shiny, but they shouldn't be that shiny. And this can definitely work with some styles. I think this typically works best with styles that are like very cartoony, where everything is shaded like that, and where the shadows are in equal contrast to the light, you know? So it's like really bright highlights, but equally as dark shadows, you know what I mean? But sometimes when I see that, and it can work in other styles as well, I'm not saying it can't, but I definitely see this where I think this usually typically becomes unappealing to me is whenever it's usually done on artwork that is supposed to be a bit more realistic, and has typically softer shading, and then it's just specifically the highlights are extremely bright. I'll typically see this on hair and on faces. Because there is a distinct rim on hair whenever there's halo shadows and things on hair and stuff like that. But sometimes I'll see people do very bright, almost white streaks across hair. And things like that. And sometimes it doesn't even really match the flow of the hair. And it can make the hair really look like metal more than actual hair. Because in real life, that lighting isn't that hard. It's pretty soft most of the time, depending on how harsh your light source is. And then on skin, it can make the skin look pretty wet, depending how bright that highlight is, you know? There is a pretty distinct highlight typically on the tips of our noses and sometimes on our cheeks, depending on the lighting and how hard our cheekbones are and stuff like that. But typically, when I see this done with soft shading and then these very, very bright highlights on the tips of noses and things, it can make your character look like they're supposed to be wet, you know? Like they just took a swim or a shower or something like that, which isn't always bad. Again, this is definitely something that can work depending on the style. Just personally to me, I don't always really love it whenever it seems like somebody is more made of metal when they're not supposed to be, because skin and hair usually isn't that shiny unless you have some product on it, you know? I think it especially can be jarring whenever the clothes are shaded normally, like they're shaded with soft shading and not very stark lighting, you know, because then there's this sort of inconsistency that would add to the illusion that the hair or skin is made of metal or is wet or something like that. So again, little personal thing, but this is definitely not one of my biggest pet peeves because I've seen plenty of cases where it totally can work, you know. This last one's kind of funny. It's my favorite example personally because I kind of made a bit of a joke out of this one, but it's whenever there's like spiky realistic eyelashes on stylized characters, and honestly in general, this one's weird because technically this is not inaccurate. There's no technical reason for this to be incorrect most of the time. So it's just I don't know why this one bugs me sometimes. This is typically again, this is another one that kind of stemmed from me for anime, but I've seen other people do it and it's just I don't know why I don't really like it all that much. But it's whenever the eyelashes look jaggedy and they look almost fluffy, you know, and it's not entirely unnormal. I will say in anime, I think the reason why in anime it typically bugs me is in anime you'll typically see it where it'll just be on the very edges of the eyes. You'll have this little like almost looks like a brush, you know, on the very end of their eyelid. So I think that's sometimes where it is because that is a little bit less realistic than having it all the way around the eye. But I'll see it sometimes, and I don't know why I don't really like it. I think it's just because it doesn't look like it's supposed to be normal. I mean, in real life, that is what our eyelashes do. Our eyelashes do not taper out naturally. They do not naturally create very distinct shapes, like most stylizations would do, they normally do look a lot more fluffy and mismatched, you know? So there's no reason to actually not do this, you know? There's no actual, like, objective reason not to. It's just something I personally don't like looking at sometimes with certain art. I think some people can do it where it looks fine, and I think that typically stems from more realistic styles. But typically when I see it in more stylized, more cartoony work, it kind of almost makes me think like it's that really it's just like really overdressed makeup where like somebody just went all ham on the mascara, you know? So that's kind of what I joked about for my example, just to play around and be goofy. But yeah, again, there's no real objective reason not to like this, you know? There's nothing I can say that of a reason why. It's just something that personally doesn't appeal to me sometimes with art. Again, some people can do it, some people can't, you know, just to me personally. But so yeah, I don't entirely know the exact reason why I don't like this because it's not inaccurate. It's just, to me, it looks a little odd. But I don't know. Maybe that's just me and all that good stuff. But yeah, so that's my last pet peeve, I guess. Those are all my pet peeves that I had to offer out there. So like I said earlier in the video, if you have a random pet peeve you want to share, please feel free to share it in the comments below. And if you like this video, please feel free to leave a like and all that good stuff. I'd love to hear what kind of random art style things bother you for no discernible reason, as mine did. So with that out of the way, I have one last very important announcement to make. Can you guess what it is? It's the Patreon shoutouts. Hey, you. Yeah, you. Yeah, you $5 tier plus patrons. Get over here. Put your money in the bag, why don't you? You first, Isabel GD. Put the money in the bag. Oh, you next, Gun Moon. You step up. You too, Shadowcat Inc. Don't think I don't see you over there. Mick, don't you run away, Mick. You haven't put your money in the bag. Starman, I see that. Thank you all for your content. Oh no. What's that? Oh no, it's the $10 tier plus patrons. They're coming after me. Not Pythonus. Cynical Sagittarius. Oh no. Oh, and there I see Netta Sprinkles back there. I'm screwed. Oh, Twisted Disaster and Lorenth. Oh no, Jago too, and Fema and Petty Prince. I'm dead. Angel of Darkness, and they're being back my Miss Mercutio and Skyak too. I better make a run for it, boys. I'll see you in the next video, whatever it may be. Zodiac out.